that apply to them. In those circumstances, it may lead to that. But it also may assist us that where there are partnerships with other governments, with subnational level or otherwise, that can assist Australia in promoting our foreign affairs and our national interests as we pursue those around the world, be it in trade or people-to-people relationships, having knowledge of those arrangements can greatly assist us.
How likely then, Stephen, is this legislation to get through Parliament?
Well, it looks pretty likely at this stage, you'd have to say. Of course, the government would most easily get this through with Labor's support, and while Labor has criticised elements of the way the government's handled this, the Shadow Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, has made it pretty clear Labor is all but certain to support it, though it has, as I mentioned, really been fairly critical of the way the government's actually handled this. Now, one of the main points of contention here that has perhaps actually seen this legislation come to the fore is the Victorian government's agreement with the Chinese government over the contentious Belt and Road Initiative. The coalition in the last year or so has been fiercely critical of that, and there's a pretty widespread suspicion that that agreement will be on the chopping block should this legislation get through. Now, Penny Wong has been quick to point out that originally, when this MOU was struck back in 2018, the coalition actually welcomed it. The Trade Minister, Simon Birmingham, was all in favour of it. And furthermore, she says that the coalition has, in many cases, let down its guard when it comes to state governments striking agreements with foreign powers, pointing out that it was under the coalition's watch that the port of Darwin was sold to a Chinese consortium. Let's take a listen to what Penny Wong had to say.
Now, the sort of powers that the government is talking about to override arrangements that are counter to the national interest, of course Labor supports that. And we will look carefully at the legislation as it comes forward to make sure it is both workable and consistent with the powers of the Parliament. But I would also make this point. We should never forget when Mr Morrison stands up that it was on his watch that the sale of the Port of Darwin, or the control of the Port of Darwin, was shifted to a foreign entity.
So it does look, like I mentioned, that this will get through the Parliament. The next question, I guess, is which deals exactly are going to be reviewed and which are potentially going to be scrapped, something that will be watched very closely indeed here in Canberra.
Will do. OK, thank you very much for that, Stephen. We're going to talk about it further now with the adjunct professor Jocelyn Che from the Australia-China Relations Institute at UTS. She joins us now. She's also a former diplomat with postings in both China and Hong Kong. Afternoon to you. First of all, what do you make of these proposals?
Well, I think that this, along with the increased powers for ASIO, give one the feeling that there's a creeping authoritarianism coming into Canberra. Canberra wants to take charge and override those who maybe have professional or local or industrial or business interests. And we're all being folded up into a greater degree of regulation by a central government authority. So in general, I'm not happy with what is going on. However, I would like to emphasize that, as, for instance, as the founding director of the Australia-China Institute for Arts and Culture at Western Sydney University, and as the first executive director of the Australia-China Council, way back when, that, Australia is committed to developing friendly and cooperative arrangements with China and with its Asian neighbours. And we're certainly, nobody, I'm sure, in Canberra or elsewhere is wanting to put up drawbridge and cut ourselves off from relations with our Asian neighbours.
And the Prime Minister didn't specifically talk about China. It was international agreements, relationships and deals, wasn't it? But in your view, is it directed at China?
Nobody is mentioning China, but I'm sure that it's China that they chiefly have in mind, yes.
The Prime Minister was very keen to stress when he announced this earlier on today with the Foreign Minister that it's all about what's in the national interest. Yes, states look after their own state interests, but he has to have the oversight to look after the national interest. When he's playing that card, is he right? Because he has to look at more things than just state governors do.
Sure, national interest, but what do we mean by national interest? I mean, often these very terms are debatable. It's when you start talking about national interest and national security that you get nervous. I mean, there is the foreign interference is another word which is subject to all kinds of interpretation.
What do you think, then, would be reasonable parameters? I mean, it's a bit of a difficult question, but a reasonable parameter for determining whether to allow deals in the national interest?
Well, I think the most important thing is to be open. When there is an agreement that's been reached between a university and, let us say, and the Chinese Ministry of Education setting up a Confucius Institute, and speaking personally, I'm very dubious about Confucius Institutes. But if the agreement is open and in the public interest, and if there is regular reporting and public security, then I feel much more relaxed about it.
OK, interesting. I mean, how many projects that are either in the pipeline or in existence do you think might be affected by this?
Well, it sounds as if they're determined to scuttle the Victorian arrangement about participation in China's Belt and Road Initiative, although that is only a memorandum of understanding. It's not an agreement at this stage. As I understand, when the memorandum was drawn up a couple of years ago, there was a forecast that they would reach a roadmap, I think was the word that was used, by the year 2020, but that has not been reached. So there is no detail there that can actually be examined or put to the test. It's simply an MOU.
OK. We just heard from Stephen Jedgetts, our correspondent there, that he thinks that it's very likely to go through and become legislation. Do you agree with him?
I would expect so, yeah. It's in line with other moves that the government has been engaged in.
How then do you think China will respond, Jocelyn?
I think they'll see it as yet one more step that we have, that is sort of decoupling from China. And I think it will be a matter of regret, because it will put a number of existing agreements under examination and possible endanger them to cancellation.
Yeah,
I thought that the Minister Wang yesterday, speaking to the National Press Club, made in fact a very reasonable, sound and almost conciliatory speech, emphasising that China wishes to engage with Australia, and it will be a rebuff to that approach.
OK, interesting. As I mentioned, it's supposed to be an international. It will be an international bill. Is it likely to have an impact for other states, other countries?
It could do. If we were going to be fair about it, then we should look at agreements that, for instance, the United States Study Centres have with the United States, and all other agreements between universities and foreign governments, whether it's in Asia or Europe or the Americas or wherever.
You've explained very eloquently what you think of it. Who do you think will suffer under this potential new legislation? Who will lose out?
I'm really concerned about the position of Chinese Australians because they, through their networks of contacts, have helped a number of universities to set up agreements with sister institutions, research institutions and universities in China. And if they become suspect as persons, as distinct from the agreements that are set up, that will be make them feel extremely uncomfortable and probably unwelcome
And who benefits then? Presumably a local workforce who would get the jobs, local contractors, local companies?
No, I don't think so. I mean, China is our biggest trading partner. It's increased its investment here. The loser will be Australia because we will lose the students, the tourists, we will lose the investment, we will lose the trade opportunities. It's really raising a rock to drop it on our own feet.
Jocelyn Che, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Victoria's second wave has claimed another 23 lives, but the downward trend in new coronavirus cases continues. 113 infections were recorded overnight. That's the lowest figure since July the 5th. The state government is hopeful it will soon be able to lay out a plan to reopen and begin repairing the economic damage from the lockdown. Reporter Sarah Jane Bell has more from Melbourne.
As you said, in some good news, those numbers are on the downward trend. Now, the number of frontline healthcare workers who currently have coronavirus has also fallen. There are currently 391 healthcare workers in Victoria with active cases of coronavirus. That's down from 434 yesterday. Now, overall, the number of people with new coronavirus cases has gone down to 113 new cases today. That's down from 149 new cases yesterday. But sadly, the death toll is continuing to rise. Another 23 Victorians have lost their lives to the virus. Now, 22 of those deaths have been linked to aged care settings. It takes the state's toll to 485, a number that is continued to rise again, expected to rise again.
Yeah, there's been talk about extending the state of emergency there in Victoria. What can you tell us about that today?
Now, the Premier, Daniel Andrews, says he is in productive discussions with crossbench MPs about extending that state of emergency. Now, this comes after he announced plans on Monday to extend the state of, or to try to extend the state of emergency by another year, taking the total to 18 months. Now, that's the legal framework that sits behind the restrictions such as mandatory masks and the lockdowns. It drew immediate criticism from the opposition, who said it was an overstep of power. And Reason Party MP Fiona Patten said earlier today that it would not be supported by crossbench MPs and a 6-month extension would be more likely. But Daniel Andrews says he's confident that whatever the outcome, it will continue to protect public health.
I'm very confident that we will get to an outcome that both protects public health and gives us the rules that we need to plan to open, not rules to stay closed, but indeed rules that will assist us in putting together a long-term plan to repair the damage, to get people back to work, to get businesses up and running again, and to, as I said many times, to find that COVID normal.
Sarah Jane, the inquiry into hotel quarantine is still underway. What's been heard today?
That's right. So that's the independent inquiry into the botched hotel quarantine scheme here in Victoria. Now, today we've heard from a senior bureaucrat within the Department of Jobs, Precincts and Regions. That's Claire Phoebe. And she's told the inquiry that she was concerned the police weren't more heavily involved with those quarantining measures for people returning to hotels. Now, she says that the department, the health department had advised that staff on the ground wouldn't need to wear PPE as long as they were social distancing. And she informed the inquiry she had brought up concerns about not having police there 24/7 to ensure people were quarantining appropriately.
That was my view for two reasons. The first being that it was a very complex operation and it wasn't something that we had done before. We weren't easily able to anticipate and understand ahead of time what the risks or issues would be in delivery. And so having a greater level of oversight was a good way to manage that. And the second, I had people in my team who were working with Health and Human Services and scoping up what they thought the security arrangements could look like. And their advice to me was that security should be acting under the instruction of authorised officers with oversight and on-site support by Victoria Police.
Now, the hotel inquiry will continue tomorrow with key representatives from a number of different hotels involved in the program expected to give evidence.
Well, 9.